All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this panel. Today we have Tim Clarke. For over 30 years, Tim has been inventing, designing, and sculpting some of the most unusual toys to ever be marketed in the United States and abroad. Once known as the King of Gross after co-creating in the 80s Sectaurs by Coleco and the Boglins by Mattel. I love creating my own mythology. The world is filled with modern-day mythological creatures, and you can find them in every nook and cranny of your bedroom closets. So, I believe that the people all here today are very curious to find out about the mystical life of yourself. We want to thank you for being here first and foremost.
Thanks.
So, the people are dying to know,
Yes.
What was your first job?
My first job out of college was dyeing Snuffleupagus fur for the Muppets. And it was basically the rookie job for everybody who came in because it was the most hated job. And Snuffy's fur was like a off-white color, and it had to be dyed a very specific orange-brown. And Kermit Love, who designed Snuffleupagus and Big Bird, said, "Tim, here, you just need to fill up these giant vats of dye, bring them to a boiling temperature." And he said, "I have insulated gloves for you." And the insulated gloves went to here. And he said, "Just dye all these sections of the fur fabric the same color." And I said, "Okay, fine." So I started doing it. The only problem was that the vats were deeper than the length of the gloves. So after a while, I was being very careful, and then I made the mistake of pushing the fur fabric down too far into the dye vat, and it all ran into the gloves. So I walked around New York City with brown arms, a very strange colored orange-brown arm, and I would get on the subway and people would just kind of like move away from me, trying to wonder what strange disease I had. So then after that, the next grunt job was individually sewing Big Bird's feathers. They would be backed with a very sheer silk to give them body, some weight, and so we would have to zigzag sew each feather to a piece of silk, and then take that and hot glue it one at a time to his body. And every year for Sesame Street, there would be a new Snuffy made and a new Big Bird, and the previous years would be backup in case something happened on set. So that was my introduction to puppet making at Muppets.
So when you were with the Muppets, everybody knows about the illustrious Jim Henson.
Yes.
So what was he like on a personal level?
Jim was actually very shy.
Can you give us one of your favorite stories about Jim Henson? You and Jim Henson?
I think my favorite thing was being in the workshop in London, and Jim was so shy that he would walk in. And there was a character he did on Sesame Street called Big Blue, who was basically just a big round blue head that they would redress depending on what the scene was. And he would walk in and he would use Big Blue's voice to talk to us. Because in many ways, Jim, I think, was more comfortable being a puppet than being himself. And so he would walk in and go, "Well, Ben, how are you doing today? And what are you working on?" And we look at him like so. And we always used to say that Jim had a whim of iron, because it's like especially when I started working there, I was so in awe of Jim and Frank and everybody else that I was like painfully shy myself. So he would come in and he would take a look at what you were working on. At the time I was working on sculpting one of the Mystic Heads. And he'd say, "Tim, what if you tried this and this and this, as you're sculpting it?" He said, what do you think about that?" And I didn't even question it. I just said, "Okay, this is what Jim wants." And I re-sculpted the head completely. And he would come once a week regularly because at the time he was working on Muppet Show. So he came in and he took a look at what I had done, and he said, "What did you do?" You know, like I said, "Well, Jim, when you were here last week, you said, what if you tried this and this and this?" And so I, listened to what you said and I changed it. And he goes, "No, I didn't mean you should actually do it. I was just saying, like, what if you tried that?" So he was incredibly open and patient, and because it was my first job, I knew I was very lucky, but I also didn't realize how open-ended the process was in working for Jim. It's like you could basically go off on crazy tangents, and Jim would say, "Yeah, go for it. Let's see what happens with it," And so it was an amazing and wonderful experience, to say the least.
That's fantastic, because we always hear that Jim Henson is, a nice and caring, warm guy, and some people even have him on the same level as, like Steve Jobs or people who are just true visionaries. Would you say so?
I would say he was more of a visionary than anybody else, except for Disney. Yeah. I really, it wasn't like Jim got into doing the Muppet Show and Sesame Street and looked at the Muppets as the be-all and end-all. He couldn't wait to try something different and something new. And like people ask me, well, what do you think about CGI now? And Jim was like right there at the very beginning experimenting with CGI. And in the Jim Henson Hour, he had one of the first CGI characters ever created. It's like he was at the advent. He was always experimenting, always looking into new things, and very, like without a doubt, the single most important influence on the way that I think about doing products or creating, characters or anything.
Fantastic. So you have two children who are now long since grown, but were they Sesame Street fans around the time?
I don't think they had a choice.
So how did they feel? Because I can imagine, because Sesame Street is such a huge cultural phenomena. Mm-hmm. They would go to school and hear people, see people with Elmo lunchboxes and stuff, and
right.
and think, that's what my dad does.
It's hard for me to answer that in a way. It's like my children definitely had a very unusual upbringing, but if you ask my son, he'd say it was totally frustrating because I would be designing and developing toys in my studio, and he would want to play with them, and I would say, no, you can't touch that, it's a prototype. And so it's like it was a two-edged sword for him.
Yeah.
Once something came out and it was on the market and I was getting samples, they had always tons of stuff to play with, but it's like he would want to interact with what I was currently working on.
Well, I bet after Christmas shopping was kind of light because you just had everything there when it was all the samples, right?
No, your kids always want what you don't have.
So
I mean, he was crazy for Ghostbusters. Both he and my daughter were really into Ghostbusters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and so it's like it doesn't matter. It's like they would take the stuff that I had kind of for granted, but it's like it was always what was on TV.
So you made the Mystics for 1983's The Dark Crystal.
Right.
So what was it like seeing your craftsmanship not only on a television screen, but now you're seeing it on the big screen? What was that like?
Actually, I in a little way, I was disappointed because when they shot Dark Crystal, Ozzie Morris, who was the head of cinematography, put a lot of heavy gels on all the lighting, and they would fill the room with artificial smoke. So after working on Dark Crystal for 2.5 years, a lot of the detail that we spent putting into the design of them was lost on film. And it wasn't until Henson started doing the traveling shows where they were setting up in museum exhibits, and friends of mine would come and say, "Oh my God!" It's like, I cannot believe how detailed every single thing is. I mean, the mystics, even the beads. I mean, we were making their eyes. The beads were all hand carved. So like they would have, like all these things hanging off them. The beads in their hair were all handmade. It's like there wasn't a single element in any of those characters that was like off the shelf. It was just this incredible volume of work.
So at least it was a labor of love, right?
Very much so, definitely.
So what was the transition like so you were making things from productions, be it TV, cinema, or otherwise, and then you started making toys. Right. So what was that transition like? Because I'd imagine that there'd be maybe less of the aesthetic of actually holding it versus the aesthetic of just seeing it through a lens, right? So would there be it's a different angle.
Well, I had talked to when I was at Muppets. After working on Fraggle Rock, I started doing a lot of toy sculpting for different toy companies through Muppets. So, like, one of the first jobs I did was sculpting Bert and Ernie's head for Applause Toys. And I got fascinated. It's like I went to Jim and I said, "Look at Jim, I think what we are doing is so much more innovative than what the toy companies are doing. And why don't, instead of we just licensing, why don't we create new concepts and products for kids to play with that are toys, and not be relying on them to come to us, but turn it around so that we're giving them new and innovative ideas." And I always say it was like the best kick in the pants I ever got. Jim said to me, "Tim, it's a wonderful idea. I just don't want to do it." And not too long after Fraggle Rock ended, Henson couldn't sell, the next, TV product that they wanted to do, or the next TV show. Jim was having difficulty, pitching it and getting a network to back it. Much to all of our amazement, because we were like, how can you have like the most popular two shows on television, Muppet Show and Sesame Street, and then Fraggle Rock, which was done by HBO in its very beginning, and it not being able to place the next thing. So he basically said to a lot of us, well, we're going to put you on freelance and we'll just call you in as we have projects. So when he did that, I said, well, now I'm going to take some time and try and develop toy products on my own and pitch them to the toy companies. So I hooked up, unfortunately the toy industry is very closed. Major toy companies don't want new people coming in because they don't know where your ideas came from and they don't trust you. So if they don't know you, they don't want to know you. So I had no choice but to get an agent who was Seven Towns at that time, who represented Rubik's Cube. And I called them, and even they didn't want to see me. And I called them and I said, I have a bunch of toy ideas and blah, blah, blah. And they said, yeah, we know, we get a lot of people who call us. And I said, and I used to work for the Muppets, and I have like a lot of product ideas I would like to push forward. And the guy said to me, oh, you work for Muppets? Okay, come in, So I went in and I just started showing him ideas. And one of the things that I did was a hand puppet that was a fly. And I made it for a Halloween party because I didn't like wearing masks. Because I never understood, like, you go to a Halloween party and you got a whole mask or set up, and then you can't eat or converse or talk to people. So I just made this fly, and it was very realistic, and I would just go up to people in the Halloween party and I would just do this, and like they would freak out. And so I pulled that out of my bag, and the agent at Seven Towns took one look at it. He said, oh, that's really cool. If you could make an action figure to sit on the back of it, and then kids could make believe they're the creature, And I said, yeah, okay, fine, no problem. So that's how Sectaurs started, is basically from that hand puppet that was a fly, and thinking about puppets not just as this, but something else. So that was, Maureen Trotto and myself, who worked on Sectaurs together, we have been working on TV commercials and doing props and puppets for TV commercials. And the agent at Seven Towns showed it to Coleco, and Coleco like bought it right away. It was like no hesitation. They were like, great, we're going to do it. So that's how Sectaurs happened.
That's incredible. So you were a pioneer puppeteer. If you reinvented the beyond going like
well,
this.
it's really interesting because puppets in the toy business had kind of a bad rap. Like it was kind of a very small niche market. So they never referred to Sectaurs as being puppets. They called them the creatures that come alive in your hands. It was never referred to as being a puppet. And the funny thing is, at Toy Fair we did blacklight theater. So we had all the puppeteers completely covered in black, and then we just front lit the stage, and the insects would come flying in and flying out with the action figures on. And it's like all these guys, in gray suits in the toy industry. Like you think you go to Toy Fair and it would be like all this fun and, like a lot of, and it's all guys in gray suits with, notepads taking, and looking at price lists, and like they're so reserved. And they went in and they watched the show, and then I was standing in the hallway after it, and they would come out and they go, did you see those things? Like, how the hell did they make those things move? They were totally, like just like little kids. They were just like totally amazed that these things were flying through space, and they couldn't figure out how it was done. So it was really wonderful to have like that much effect that, throughout Toy Fair that year, people were talking about it. It's like, and we were all like, oh, this is going to be great. It's like, people were buying into it, and unfortunately, Coleco went belly up in a year and a half. So Sectaurs just went, was just a flash in the pan of toy design.
So what are you up to now, and what are your long-term goals moving towards the future?
Well, I'm very thankfully Zika Toys is going to be relaunching Sectaurs as a G.I. Joe scale. They're going to be going to a Kickstarter in March. What else? Boglins. I have so many people who've been pestering me about Boglins and bringing Boglins back, and I've been trying to get a major toy company interested in them. So far, there's been lukewarm interest. So I just decided, well, I'm going to start making them myself. And I worked with a plastics company for the last, 5 or 6 months in trying to develop a material that I could physically cast myself in my own studio. And so that's what I've been doing, is just, and taking them around to shows like this so people get to know that they're out there again.
So what do you think of Coleco Expo this year?
I'm amazed that it happened.
It must be kind of profound because you used to work for the original Coleco,
Yeah.
so now you see the logo again,
Yeah.
and it must be kind of where'd my time machine get parked?
Yeah, I'm surprised that it came together. So,
Well-
and I hope it grows.
We were absolutely thrilled to have you here. You're personally one of my favorite guests I've interviewed. Big fan of the Muppets and Sesame Street growing up, and I'm sure everybody here is as well. So we just want to thank you on behalf of ColecoVision for stopping by.
Thank you, Max.
So thank you, everybody. And coming up next at 1:30, we have Mr. Tyler Bushnell, who is a software engineer, and he's working on pioneering the video game industry. And stick around for his PowerPoint presentation. That's all I'm going to say. Come see the PowerPoint if you want to know how he's going to do that. So thank you, everybody,
Cool.
for stopping by.
Thanks, Max.
Mm-hmm.